If you follow a Demon's Souls Remake speedrun scene around the game's launch, you would know the game was broken very fast. One particular glitch being so game-breaking, it forced us to place this kind of run in its own separate category in the leaderboard. Today, we're going to break down how this glitch brought down the fastest run from over 40 minutes to below 20 minutes in a single day. And under 17 minutes later on. To briefly summarize the goal of Demon's Souls, there are 5 worlds in this game with an archdemon at the end of every world. The Dragon God, the Old Monk, the Storm King, Maiden Estrella, and False King Allant. These are the major bosses and the only bosses needed dead to get the flag that opens the end of the game. So any bosses in between can be skipped entirely if there's a skip for it. I should also note that every world has a corresponding level, which generally we label 1-1, level 1 of world 1, 1-2, level 2 of world 2, etc. Before the discovery of the huge glitch we're going to discuss today, the fastest run we had was by Romanticore at 43 minutes and 9 seconds on November 22nd, 2020. With the magic spell based build, the route for any percent at the time goes as follows. Roman skips the tutorial as you do, then gets through the first level 1-1 by defeating the boss Phalanx. After a brief tour of the Nexus, the hub of the game, he goes to World 3, performs 2 major skips back to back, which we'll discuss a little bit more later, then uses a stunlock strategy to beat the first boss of World 3, Fool's Idol. Then he proceeds to the next level of the same world, performs another huge skip, and kills the Man-Eaters. After a detour to get a major magic spell vendor, he goes back to World 3 to defeat the first archdemon of the run in Old Monk. After this, his build is complete and so will mostly be going through the full worlds, starting with World 5. With no major skips in any of these levels, he does have to fight both of the regular roadblock bosses before getting to Maiden Estrella and defeating her, killing the second archdemon. From there he goes to World 2, which does provide more shortcuts before reaching Dragon God, the third archdemon. Next is World 4, and in this one we're actually able to skip from the first level of the world all the way to the archdemon, Storm King, skipping any boss in between. Only one archdemon and world left, World 1 is next. And unfortunately, like World 5, it doesn't have any major skips and it does require every boss to be killed. Even worse, this world has 4 bosses total, although we did already kill the first one in the beginning of the game. With that, the last archdemon is False King Allant, and with his death, the floor in the center of the Nexus is opened and leads to the final boss of the game, the true King Allant. To check the endgame time in this game, runners can either check the final time it shows in the information tab of the game files they ran in, or go to the Pantheon, an online room at the top of the Nexus that shows the top 15 fastest completions of the game in the world, but only if you made it to said top 15. So here's where you can see Roman's 43:09 time. With the strat used in this run, I'd say it's a pretty good run. Now to tackle the meat of the video, the very next day, the glitch that I've been alluding to since the beginning was found. The man himself, Distortion2, posted a video on November 23rd discussing a glitch he found that allowed him to, in the right circumstances, warp from the beginning of any world all the way to the archdemon. This demonstrates this by warping from the beginning of World 2 to literally underneath the Dragon God, where the archdemon of that level would be normal. This can either be called a wrong warp or a force quit warp. To simplify this as best I can, every archdemon in this game has a corresponding index, meaning that the game will know that, say, you're in the 3rd level of a world, and will store that value. We can abuse this to warp to any world where we would like to reach a part of the world we haven't unlocked yet. To do this, we warp into a particular level of any world, storing its index value, then traveling to a world we would like to reach that indexed part of the world, and as you see the world load in from the load screen, you force close the game from the dashboard. This will cause the index of the previous world to default to be your save archstone for the next world you load into. So of course you load the game back after this, and you'll see that you're still in the world you warped to before closing. Now all you need to do is die, and you will see that if done right, you'll be warped to whichever part of the world you have indexed. As someone who isn't versed in games programming, that's about as simply as I can explain it and understand it myself. But needless to say, this comes incredibly handy in speedruns, and so now I'd like to show you how this put this glitch to use and brought down the time significantly. Before the run even starts, runners use a different character to set the index that would warp them to Phalanx, but it's not required to show in runs. In the character creator, Dist will use the Magician class, but the build will deviate wildly from Roman's run. He will also pick Firebombs to speed up Phalanx. As soon as he warps into World 1, the first force quit is performed in order to warp into Phalanx's room, as mentioned. This little fire is the fastest way to die, so that's how Dist will take a death. From there, the Phalanx fight goes as normal. Firebombs, then Flame Toss. After that, back in the Nexus, he buys a dagger and Crescent Moongrass, then talks to the Monumental to unlock the other levels, as they were locked until this point. After that, Dist takes a death in order to not affect the world tendency in the next wrong warp death. The next world he goes to is World 2, where he of course does the Force Quit. But before he dies, he picks up the sticky white slime near the beginning, then takes a death by the boulders. This leads him behind the armored spider where he can safely kill it. He applies the sticky white slime he just got into his dagger to speed up the process. After that, he drops a flame lurker through the normal shortcut. Friendly reminder, you need to unlock an archdemon's archstone to be able to wrong warp to other archdemons, so for now the run is relatively normal. He does nearly fall to his death, but he saves it with a quit out. When he gets flame lurker, he will use the other sticky white slime, cast water veil, and mostly tanking his hits as he tries to stunlock him as much as possible, and topping off health with some grass he just got. After flame lurker, he returns to the Nexus to level up and register Pure White Tendency in World 2, both in order to be able to get and wield the Dragon Bone Smasher, the primary weapon of the run. This is got in the Dragon God room, so he continues to do the fight normally. He gets roasted on the way to the second ballista, but he casts a safety water veil before it, so he survived. Next up is World 3 Wrong Warp. However, now we do have an Archdemon Archstone, so we can now jump to the final level of almost a new world. Before he dies in World 3, he does a skip called the Coffin Skip in order to get down from the starting floor of the world to the first floor. It is an older version of the skip, but it gets the job done. From there, he now does part of the arrow trap skip by rolling through the arrows in this ballista trap to get a ring on the bridge called the Clever Rat's Ring, which increases your damage when you're at 30% HP. While picking up the ring, the arrows kill him, and then he gets warped straight into the old monk's room. The old monk is immediately aggroed, so this is a good way to set up Clever Rat's Ring fast. Unfortunately, shortly after, this takes 2 deaths to old monk. The DBS knocks back the old monk with any hit, but he's very fast and can jab you without enough time to react, so the fight is both easy and difficult at the same time. After a good chain of attacks and a backstab, this is able to kill him, then warps to World 5. The fastest death is simply to fall to your death, and then when warped into Maiden Astraea's room, you will see that she is frozen, as she is activated by the cutscene at the Fog Gate. That being said, you are spawned and immediately plagued at half health, so it's still a dangerous situation. So this will be offsetting the HP drain by using the Crescent Moongrass heals as he's maxer, ideally in Clever Rat Ring range. From there, World 4 is next, but as we established earlier, the indexing for this world is a bit off for some unknown reason. So when taking the death here, it warps you to the Old Hero's room instead, so this needs to fight him first. Ideally, Old Hero will do the AoE attack early in the fight, which this can block with his shield for a perfect CRR setup. From there, it's simply R1 punishes when there's an opening, but being careful not to be too greedy. After that, he warps to the Nexus to put nearly all souls into the magic stat, and buys the Soul Arrow and Cloak spells, which will be used in the Storm King fight. While setting up Clever Rat Ring range, he tries to kill as many manners as possible to not have them bother him as he tries to kill the Storm King with Soul Arrow. This doesn't go too well and isn't able to position for Storm King properly, and misses a lot of his attacks, resulting in him not only having to do a second cycle, but a third cycle. So he's too far away from the Archstone, he decides to use the Nexio Binding to get back to the Nexus, then warp back to the Storm King Archstone to perform the next wrong warp. The only world left is World 1, so this will be returning there and dying at the same spot as the beginning of the run. As the indexing for World 4 is offset by 1 value up, this allows you to warp into the False King's room, and because he's triggered by the cutscene like Astraea, he is also frozen. There's no way to set up CRR in this room, so he will simply R1 him to death, then Nexio Bind. Now to end the run with the True King, he attempts to set up Clever Rat's Ring as he attacks the boss. 1 counter hit is required to get it within 2 hits, but he doesn't get it, so he has to block a 3rd hit. Then he's careful to only hit once to not trade hits and die. He then hits a Maiden in Black for the faster ending, and then goes to the Pantheon to check his time, and ends with a 19-minute run flat. Despite the huge time save from the previous 80%, this run clearly has some significant time losses, namely the Old Monk deaths and the Storm King 3 cycle, but the run is definitely very cleverly routed, and even with some of the newer glitches found more recently, there's not a lot you can do to improve the general route. And as stated, we did put this in its own category in the leaderboard called 80% Force Quit. Knowing he could do much better, this will do more runs, and the next day he will get another PB with only a few minor changes. For this run, Phalanx turned out slightly worse. This boss can be quite annoying RNG wise, since the way the hoplite spread is very random. After the Monumental, he misses the faster death in Nexus to be in soul form, losing around 3 seconds or so. After the Sticky White Slime, he gets the slightly slower rock death. As he drops down to Flame Lurker, he doesn't need to quit down into the drop down, but he does lose some time in the boss fight. So far the run seems worse, but I promise it's faster by the end. In Dragon God, he doesn't get it roasted as he runs to the second ballista, so he has a cleaner run through it. When picking up the Clever Rat's Ring, he has a slower ballista death, but he has a much faster Old Monk. He does more backstabs and has a pretty fast fight. No deaths this time. Main Astraea is more or less identical, but he does save some time. He has a slower old hero due to longer time taken to set up CR, and he also experienced a game freeze that likely cost him some IGT, unfortunately.
Game? Okay, game. This is... Come on. I rolled. Game. Come on. You can do it.
It took him longer for CR and Storm King, but doesn't lose time technically. He then gets an incredibly tight one cycle Storm King, which he either practiced or figured out after the last run, as it's the most precise part of the run, I would say. This time he warps straight to World 1 and he has more optimized swings on AFK Allant, bouncing against the walls. And he gets faster CR True King and more optimized swings. But being shy just killing him at the end, he had to use a soul arrow to kill him. With that, he checks the time and gets a 17:18, saving nearly 2 minutes. In the description of the video, this says this route could go down all the way to a mid 16-minute run, however he wouldn't get another PB. This run was very annoying to grind because of the very early reset points, with both Phalanx and Flame Lurker potentially being run killers for such a short run, so I believe he just lost interest in the category and went back to try the regular 90%. He would hold this record for 4 months until I tried my hand at it. Now I do get a record, but there's a few things I should clarify. The wrong warp glitch would eventually be patched, meaning that to be able to do this run, you would have to downpatch to the 1.0 version of the game on disk. Now that on its own isn't a problem, but it did affect some of the ways you perform the wrong warp. The first thing is that in the previous patches, you could index the first wrong warp by simply loading a character in the Nexus, then starting up a run immediately after. But in 1.0, the Nexus doesn't have a useful index, so you gotta load up a character that's warped into Lord's Path or any second level index, then go into the character creator. The second and last major change is a little bit more involved in the run, so we'll get to it while reviewing my run. So on March 26, 2021, I got a world record run heavily following this route. All around, this run has a lot of good individual segments RNG wise. Although Phalanx dropped some bomb tosses, I had good clearing of hoplites. I also missed the fast death after the monumental. While going to Flame Lurker, I fell a little too far and had to quit out, but I accidentally did a slope quit out and landed at the bottom, so it was an unintentional time save. Flame Lurker itself was decent, but after that I decided to pop the souls before I warp away to save some time as I arrived to the Nexus for level up. All the way to World 3, I did a faster coffin skip, as that had been optimized a little bit more. I had a very fast old monk, including the CR setup. This one can also be very RNG heavy, so it was a relief. For old hero, I also had a slow CRR setup, and I personally did R2 since I generally could only swing once anyway. Next up, I only just missed the 1 cycle for Storm King, but I should have only lost around 10 seconds. So here's the second major change in 1.0. The warp to False King works a bit different from here. I have to do a Nexio Bind, then warp back to the last Archstone of World 4, then Nexio Bind again before going to World 1 for the normal sequence of wrong warping. I currently have no idea why this is. It may be due to World 4's offset indexing, but that's just a possible correlation I'm guessing at. So if you ever have a desire to run this is the difference you should be aware of. On King Allant, I took on Distance Bounce against Wall Strat and purely do R1s on him. And finally I had a pretty fast True King with a good CRR setup. At 1.0 you can't check the Pantheon, so it's possible it was a bit faster, but I ended with a 16:59, just barely sub 17 minutes. And to this day, this is the last run that has been done for this category. Being 1.0 exclusive, I don't imagine it's one a lot of people can even do, but it is fun for a brief while. As I mentioned earlier, none of the newer glitches found can improve this run. For instance, the bow tech to freeze bosses, as it'll take too long to grab a bow. But there are a few small optimizations I've played with in my head that could save some time. For instance, I've thought of possibly dropping the Crescent Moon Grass you buy with the dagger and buying some elixirs from 201 Merchant instead. It would help with some of the fights where you need to swing a lot, but your stamina is drained. I also considered possibly getting the enchanted weapon buff from the Spell Merchant, also for some of the slower fights. The runner Ducklear also found a 2-2 slope quit out skip, which if consistent can certainly help speed it up as well. I would like to come back to this category at some point, so it's possible you'll see a new run with these strats in the future. So yeah, that's it for this video. This is a sort of an extension to my world record history video I made for the regular 90% route for both original and remake, if you're interested in seeing that as well. I'll certainly put it in the end cards here in a second. This video is the first for a lot of things for me. This is my first video after 1,000 subscribers. It is my first video to this extent that I've fully scripted. Pretty much all of it scripted except for this last bit. And it's the first video after opening my join button for memberships. So if you like this kind of content and would like to support me directly to see more of it, do consider joining the channel. Once there's a handful of y'all, I'll start implementing the benefits that are mentioned in the membership join page. I would like to thank my first joiner, Humpty. He's a buddy switching over from Twitch as I retire from streaming. And I may open a Patreon eventually as well. I need to see how things go first, or if members is good enough. So time will tell in that regard. For any 1.0 Elden Ring fans, that video will be next. It hopefully won't take them nearly as long as this took me. I definitely need some time to get this put together, but I do hope to get it out much sooner than I did this. But yeah, if you like this video today, consider subscribing. Here are more videos I think you would enjoy. And yeah, I hope to see you again. Bye bye.